Russia is currently threatening to launch new systematic strikes on Kyiv in an effort to mask its own military failures during the summer offensive and the growing economic pressure within Russia, which is fueling Russians' dissatisfaction with Putin himself. This is according to analysts from the Institute for the Study of War. Also, according to their assessment, the Kremlin leader is trying to divert attention from the humiliation of having to ask Ukraine for permission to hold a military parade on May 9th. Another justification is revenge for the alleged strike by the armed forces of Ukraine on a college in occupied Starobilsk. At the same time, analysts say that Russia traditionally intensifies its strikes not only after setbacks, but also before important negotiations.
We will talk about this and more coming up. We are now joined by Ivan Kyrychevskyi. He is a serviceman of the 413th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces Reed and a weapons expert at Defense Express. Greetings to you. Good evening.
Welcome, Mr. Ivan.
Good evening.
So let's start with the most important thing, which is the fundraiser, because donations is the least we can do in the rear for our defenders, both men and women. There is already a QR code on the screen as well as the card number. Please tell us, what are our viewers donating for today?
The donations are for the needs of the anti-aircraft drone company, which is currently operating as part of the 413th SPS Reed Regiment. We are working, let's say, with some specific equipment that has proven its combat effectiveness, but which constantly needs to be upgraded in the field. And accordingly, let's say, all this equipment requires constant overhead costs, fuel, components for upgrades, electronics, and so on. You know, everything war is, unfortunately, such a machine whose needs are hard to predict. Accordingly, our fundraising is ongoing specifically for this unit without any clear limit, because you understand, unfortunately, Russian Shaheds don't run out. Combat operations against them are ongoing, and accordingly, we continue raising funds, specifically for this unit within our regiment.
So, friends, let's not waste any time. You see the QR code, you see the card number, please join in. Let's try to be systematic as well. Mr. Ivan, regarding, well, since we're talking about drones, let's get straight to the hottest topic. What specifically do I mean by that? Just now, right before we started our broadcast, I was scrolling through the social media feeds and especially looking at the public pages. Every single day we are seeing more and more new videos of these middle strikes. Bit by bit, we are successfully taking out the enemy's logistics and supply lines. Military analysts note that the overall depth of these strikes has increased quite significantly lately. Could you please tell me exactly what stage we are currently at, and how relevant is this division into front strikes, middle strikes, and deep strikes, Mike? You know, the idea that 30-30-30 would be ideal. Does that idea still hold true today?
Well, let's put it this way. I won't talk about the specific ratio of devices being used at the front, because, you know, that is highly sensitive operational information at the level of specific units and in general overall. But if we talk about certain, I would say, counter-tactical effects, I would put it this way. Having these middle strike capabilities in our hands right now is in some ways even cooler than getting HIMARS back in 2022. Of course, yes. When we successfully acquired and deployed these rocket systems and the armed forces of Ukraine were able to systematically strike the enemy's logistics up to 50 kilometers from the front line, it turned out to be extremely disruptive and painful for them and delivered a significant blow that forced them to spend a long time reorganizing. But the nuance is that our medium-range precision strike systems provide a much greater depth and much more powerful strikes. If we talk about, let's say, the experience of the Reed Regiment, we actually use, let's say, domestic systems, well, middle strike systems from Firepoint. I would put it this way. It's not just a technological device, but also a very ergonomic one, which puts the Russian air defense and Russian infrastructure, pardon the expression, in the position of a dinosaur that adapts very slowly. Plus, you know, even this little red thing right here, this is the pin that arms the warhead on this FP2. This, you know, just illustrates how mass-produced and technological this device is. Plus, if we're also talking about middle strike, let's explain this at the same time. Front strike is what hits 30 kilometers from the front line, 50. Middle strike is 100 kilometers and more, and deep strike is already like 1,000. If we continue talking about middle strike, there are some very interesting episodes that happened in our regiment. Specifically, with one type of domestic middle strike drone, we managed to achieve a result where with a single strike and a single drone flight, we were able to destroy 2 book systems at once. To put it in relatively simple terms, What I'm getting at is that the very real and painful consequences that the Russians are now experiencing, due to the use of various middle strike drones by many different units, including our own regiment, is so extensive that they are unable to even begin to calculate it. Right now, they're just sitting there whining that their logistics are being hit somewhere along some route. Tomorrow, they'll be whining because, for example, Reed destroyed the ammunition depot of the 42nd Motorized Rifle Division. The day after tomorrow, they'll still be whining about some other strikes, including those from our regiment. All of this will only keep growing and intensifying. Accordingly, it might just turn out that in just half a year, the situation on the battlefield will transform so dramatically that it's even hard for us to imagine. Well, if even now it's very difficult for the Russians to get close to the line of contact, what prospects for offensive actions can we even talk about in half a year? I mean, offensive actions on their part.
Everything is changing right now, and in particular, we really need to talk about whether the Russians are managing to both stockpile weapons and develop something entirely new. And generally, to repeat what we've already mentioned, right now we're talking about the Oreshnik. And once again, we've seen the Oreshnik being used on Ukrainian territory. What does this indicate?
Well, unfortunately, in this case, it only indicates that they have the Oreshnik. Let me explain what I mean. We found ourselves in a certain specific trap that the Russians tried to set for us as part of their information warfare in 2023. They created the concept of the so-called operation to exhaust potential. And so, when they realized that their cruise missiles and ballistic ones too, after the initial strikes on the energy sector, did not produce the expected effect. The idea is simple. If supposedly missiles fail to achieve the psychological effect and the level of destruction they wanted, then they need to create, just boost the psychological effect itself. So it turns out, even with the same Oreshnik, on the one hand, this is a missile that really is, one you should be wary of because it's a missile with considerable striking potential, even if in practice it turned out not to be as much as expected. So colleagues have calculated that when one of these kinetic warheads, kinetic projectiles hits, the resulting crater is roughly speaking 2 by 3 meters. The missile is dangerous from a psychological standpoint, but it turns out that precisely because the Russians focus on the psychological aspect, it would actually be ideal for us to discuss their tools less. Because on the one hand, yes, what happened in Kyiv last weekend is truly devastating and tragic. On the other hand, it is almost a sacred duty to state clearly that we possess a comprehensive range of tools to strike the Russian military with such overwhelming force that they simply won't be able to recover or regroup from it. So there is a complex and delicate balance of power here. Yes, the Russians are trying to terrorize us by using various types of weaponry. But compared to 2022, 2023, or even 2024, the situation has fundamentally changed. We have parity in long-range strike capabilities, and this parity is being constantly maintained. Mm-hmm. It's just that not all Russians have time to say anything. But logically, if after a strike there are no surviving Russians, who's going to record a TikTok about it?
True.
So, my dear friends, I would just like to remind you that right now we're running a fundraiser. The fundraiser is for drones for the raid unit. So go ahead and scan the QR code, or you can manually enter the card number and help out today. Remember, there's no such thing as small or large donations, of course. Please join in right here and now, keeping in mind that only direct and verified fundraisers are part of the United News Marathon. Mr. Ivan, we still have a few minutes left. Please tell us, regarding these threats from Russia about systematic and repeated missile strikes, specifically striking Kyiv over and over again, can we now, at least in this quick format, try to assess the likelihood of such systematic attacks occurring? Well, let's say, to put it in sports terms, by extrapolating this situation to the sports field. Okay, imagine someone runs the 100 meters in 9.58 seconds. But that doesn't mean they can maintain that pace for 250 meters or a kilometer at the same speed. Tell me, please, what we saw, the horrific attack on Kyiv. How much of that is actually the Russians, and how realistic is it for them to make this systematic given their current capabilities?
If they were able to make this systematic, they would have done it already without any loud warnings. In some ways, the intensity of the strikes could be similar to what we saw in Kyiv, like how they did it in 2023. For example, if we talk about the level of unpreparedness, that was the first time we experienced massive strikes with these hypersonic missiles on Kyiv. So it turns out that back when the Russians had certain strike capabilities and we had limited means to counter them, the Russians didn't make any announcements. Now, in my opinion, they're making these kinds of announcements saying supposedly that they will strike systematically. Well, they're doing this precisely to somehow minimize their own shortcomings and try to amplify the psychological effect. Well, you know, to be fair, looking at the scale of military operations that took place in the Middle East, Iran, even with all its limited resources, managed to accumulate and produce orders of magnitude more ballistic missiles of various types than the Russians. So, compared to that same terrorist Iran, Russia feels, you know, comparatively insignificant. And that's why it frequently resorts to verbal threats, because its actual military potential is significantly and substantially lower than what they want to achieve.
Well, yes, and in particular, if we analyze our strikes on the Russian defense industry and on those targets that exist. If you could, in a minute, what successes have we achieved, and, well, mainly, what else should we expect?
Well, you know, thanks to the support, intelligence support from RAID, the Silicon plant was taken out. By the way, their missile production still hasn't recovered, nor has the production of, for example, air defense systems. During one of the strikes on Taganrog, the plant that was modernizing the 295 MS equipment was essentially destroyed. We are already seeing a trend where real cascading strikes have begun on Russian military-industrial complex facilities, not just on energy infrastructure. I think these cascading strikes will continue to escalate, and accordingly it will become even more unpleasant for them. They will try to scare us more with words, but it will only be empty threats because they are unable to restore the destroyed military-industrial complex factories.
Thank you,
Mr.
Ivan. Friends, thank you. You can continue to contribute money to this fund. Everything is solely for the victory of our Ukrainian army. To recap, Ivan Kyrychevskyi, a serviceman of the 413th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces RAID, an expert from Defense Express, was with us.